Natalie, please see if the board is available.
What is up, everybody? Jeremy Eisenfire here, and welcome to the channel. Up until this point, the Apple TV series Severance has been cloaked in a ton of mystery and suspense, with not a whole lot of definitive details being revealed about what Lumon is actually up to. And while there are a great deal of very interesting fan theories floating around out there, in my opinion there is one that stands head and shoulders above the rest in terms of actual credibility, and could potentially tell us exactly what Lumon's true endgame is. And how Severance itself also shares a ton of similarities with a classic 200-year-old horror novel. But before we get to that, we need to analyze a critical scene in Season 2, Episode 3, entitled Who is Alive? A telltale moment of monumental foreshadowing between Miss Cobel and Helena. Towards the end of Episode 3, Miss Cobel approaches Helena one last time to try and regain her position as head of the severed floor. And just as Helena invites Miss Cobel back inside Lumon to discuss the possibilities, all of a sudden Miss Cobel gets incredibly scared and starts to flee. What exactly caused this sudden rash of fear? What did make Miss Cobel scared and run away? After all, Miss Cobel is usually known for her cool and calm demeanor, and doesn't usually get rattled, so for something to scare her so suddenly and so deeply must have been incredibly frightening for her, to say the least. And I think the answer lies in the bodyguard that was standing next to Helena, which I get the feeling is no mere bodyguard at all. When trying to analyze which scenes and which characters are more important that the creators and directors want the audience to pay closer attention to, usually a common method is employed, by utilizing a very simple yet very effective filming technique with focused and unfocused lens. When Helena first invites Miss Cobel back inside Lumon, she begins to follow her none the wiser, until she sees something that startles her to her very core, which, in my opinion, is the very bodyguard standing next to her. And when we take a closer look at the scene, we start to see the focus shift from Helena to the bodyguard, indicating that the directors want us to take a look at him and not her. But why exactly is this the case? After all, why did the creators want us to take a closer look at the bodyguard and not at Helena in this scene? And to that end, I believe the answer lies in the perpetuity wing we see in Season 1, Episode 3. In particular, when we start to see all of the previous CEOs of Lumon Industries, with one of them being far more important than we originally realized. And no, it is not Keir himself, but instead Baird Eagan, who is referenced multiple times throughout the Severance universe. And when taking a closer look at Baird Eagan and the bodyguard standing next to Helena, the similarities start to become uncanny. Baird Eagan himself was in fact the fourth CEO in the history of Lumon Industries, and was born in 1902 and died in 1976, and is the great-grandson of Keir himself. He served as CEO of Lumon Industries from 1959 to 1976 upon the time of his death. His physical description states that he is an older white male with black hair and blue eyes, wearing a blue suit a little bit lighter than his predecessors, and a possibly red tie. As he was around 74 at the time of his death, it would be unusual for his hair to still be that naturally black, indicating that he must have dyed it. And when we take a closer look at the bodyguard standing next to Helena, the resemblance is striking, albeit a much younger version of Baird, indicating some kind of clone or some kind of resurrection. After all, there have been numerous different fan theories floating around about cloning and other means of resurrection that Lumon is secretly working on. And if anyone were to know some of the finer details about some of these initiatives, it would indeed be Miss Cobel herself. Could this potentially explain why she was so fearful when she saw the bodyguard standing next to Helena? Did she recognize this bodyguard as being a younger, cloned, or resurrected version of Baird Eagan himself? And if so, why exactly would such a person strike fear in the heart of Miss Cobel in the first place? And in order to understand that, we need to take a closer look at the Beard Creek Bandit. Beard Creek, of course, is a fictional subdivision within the world of Severance, and just so happens to be the home of Miss Cobel and Mark Scout, located in the fictional town of Keir, and is known to house many other different Lumon employees, with its name, Beard Creek, of course being named after Baird Eagan himself. And one thing we later learn about Baird Creek is there happens to be a bandit in the neighborhood committing home invasions of prominent Lumon employees. We first learn of this in an article after the Baird bandit targets his or her fifth home, with the victim's name being redacted. The Baird Creek bandit has apparently been breaking and entering during work hours into apartments throughout the Baird Creek townhouses. The bandit is meticulous and manages to leave nothing behind, no fingerprints, no hair, and no loose clothing, which has led local authorities to believe that the bandit is either very familiar with crime scenes or very familiar with the area itself, and could potentially live in the very same townhouses that they are robbing from. Which brings us to Miss Cobel herself. In Season 1, we see Miss Cobel enter the home of Mark's scout when Petey is in the basement hiding from her, as he sees her steal one of Gemma's candles. And when taking a closer look at the shrine that Miss Cobel has made to Keir inside her home, we start to notice a ton of different Lumon trinkets scattered throughout. Could it potentially be possible that Miss Cobel herself is indeed the Baird Creek bandit? Could she in fact be breaking and entering into the homes of Lumon employees in order to steal keepsakes to build up her Keir shrine in the first place? And if so, could this potentially explain why she became so fearful at the sight of the bodyguard who so closely resembled a younger Beard Eagan? Could she potentially have been fearful of him passing judgment on her for knowing that she has been stealing from the housing complex that is named in his honor? And if so, and this is indeed a younger version of Beard Eagan himself brought back to life, could this potentially give us a closer insight as to what Lumon's ultimate objective is? After all, there is a massive fan theory going around that Lumon's main objective is to resurrect Keir Eagan himself. And could Lumon potentially be doing practice runs of a sort and resurrecting previous CEOs of Lumon in order to perfect the method before they go on to resurrecting the final version of Keir? Could this ultimately be the true endgame of Lumon Industries? And could the work that MDR is doing be directly tied to it in the long run? After all, we do hear one of the board members say in the Season 2 trailer that the work that MDR is doing will be known as one of the greatest moments in human history. And if their work is indeed vital to resurrecting the final version of Keir, you could definitely understand why they might view MDR's work as being so important. And when looking deeper at Severance and all of the similarities that it shares with a 200-year-old Gothic horror novel, you start to wonder if this is indeed the case. Which of course brings us to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and all of the striking parallels that the two stories share. Now, at first glance, it might not seem like Severance and Frankenstein share a whole lot in common, but when you take a deeper look at some of the themes and meanings woven throughout, you can definitely start to see a ton of similarities. Some have stated that the potential resurrection of Gemma by Lumon Industries shares a lot in common with Frankenstein's monster, and the parallels certainly do not end there. In Season 2, we learn from Mark's outie that he had to successfully go and identify Gemma's body after the car accident, which he seemingly did do, which begs the question, just how exactly is she up and walking around on the severed floor, with many believing she was either resurrected or potentially cloned. And there also are some striking similarities between both Keir Eagan and Victor Frankenstein himself as well, with one such instance being the severed version of a very famous painting that was also used as the first Frankenstein cover. After all, Severance has recreated a painting by artist Caspar David Freinrich, titled Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, with the Severance version depicting Keir Eagan himself standing and overlooking the expanse. A painting that is meant to represent the uncertainty of the future of both Keir Eagan and Victor Frankenstein. And when looking a little bit deeper, the similarities between Victor and Keir are vast, with both playing God in a sense where they both believe that they could create new life out of nothing, represented by Frankenstein's monster, and of course represented by the Innies at Lumon. And much like Victor Frankenstein, Keir Eagan is also worshipped as a godlike figure among his followers, as we see represented on the show by not only Miss Cobel but even Irving himself in Season 1. Victor Frankenstein famously once stated, "A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me." Which of course is not too dissimilar from what Keir Eagan also refers to his employees as his children, as represented in the Keir Handbook. "Come now, children of my industry, and know the children of my blood." The similarities between the two stories are incredibly prevalent to say the least. Just like Frankenstein's monster upon being born, the Innies themselves also struggle to find their place among the world, which is reflected in Season 2 when Irving states, "It is not our world up there." Both Frankenstein's monster and the Innies seem to long for a normal life that forever seems just out of reach, as both are denied the basic human experience, like what it means to have a life of their own, to have friends of their own, to have hobbies, and to experience love, and longing for more than simply filling the role that they were created for. And similar to Frankenstein's monster, the Innies themselves also at some point start to rebel against their creators in pursuit of that normal life. Innie Mark and Innie Irving's lives particularly share a ton of parallels with Frankenstein's monster as well, in terms of both of them seeking a love that is most likely to end in tragedy. Not only is Irving's story most likely to have an unhappy ending, but one of Mark's lives are certain to have an unhappy ending as well, as two sides of him are in love with two different people. And especially now, with him beginning the reintegration process, one of those loves will most likely end up dying out. The minute he decided to merge the two personalities living within him, the Innie and the Outie, he is essentially dooming one of his loves, either Helly or Gemma, or could potentially be at risk of losing both. And the similarities between Frankenstein's monster and the Innies certainly do not end there, with both of them essentially being the byproduct of maniacal figures and unchecked ambition, and both being the perfect example of the dangers of scientific progression without moral consideration, which is something we also see reflected in Severance as well, as Rohigby points out to Mark during their first meeting that he created his Innie without any consent. He brought a new life into this world without any consideration as to how it would be lived, just as Victor Frankenstein brings his monster into the world without any consideration as to what kind of life he will be living. Both Victor Frankenstein and Lumon have taken liberties unto themselves by manipulating human nature for their own gain, with both entities essentially trying to create life that will be devoid of human emotion, with both Keir and Lumon creating a system of workers whose productivity and efficiency is prioritized over the basic human experience, and all of the unique complexities that come with it. At their core, both stories show the dangers of creating new life through unnatural means, in order to create the perfect workforce that is untethered by human wants and needs, which is something we also see reflected in the Keir Handbook as well, with Irving himself stating, "Let not weakness live in your veins. Cherished workers, drown it inside you. Rise up from your deathbed and sally forth more perfect for the struggle," essentially urging them to put aside any human notions of emotion and have their identities revolve around being the perfect workers without longing for anything of their own. But luckily for Frankenstein's monster and the Innies, they are seemingly bucking the system and going against their programming, unfortunately for their creators. One thing they seemingly didn't account for was to see their creations become self-aware and developing wants and desires of their own, which will ultimately lead to the downfall of both creators in my opinion, and will likely ultimately be the downfall of Lumon itself. We've already seen a small example of this at the end of Season 1 when the Innies created a small rebellion now known as the Macrodad Uprising, as they finally gained the courage and the knowledge to go against their creators in search of lives of their own, or at least in search of wants and needs of their own. And I do believe it will be that desire to have their own lives that will ultimately lead to the downfall of the company. When all is said and done, I certainly get the feeling that it will be the Innies themselves who deal the final fatal blow to Lumon, and not the Outies, which, if nothing else, at the end of the day will bring a certain poetic justice to the end of the story. Similar to Victor Frankenstein and his monster being his downfall, it will be the creations of Lumon itself that will ultimately lead to their downfall.
You know this story, the crack of lightning. A mad genius, an unholy creation.
And if the final goal of Lumon is indeed to resurrect the original Keir once more, I get the feeling the Innies are going to be there to stop it, ultimately making them the true heroes of the story. Severance, of course, has been a phenomenal ride up until this point, and knowing that we are only just getting around halfway through the story by the time Season 2 ends, as they are reportedly planning 4 seasons in total, it looks like the story is only just now beginning to heat up. And I get the feeling we are going to have a lot of twists and turns and ups and downs before it is over. But that is going to do it today for our Severance Endgame theory, and definitely leave your thoughts and comments down below. How do you see the story ending, and will the Innies ultimately triumph over Lumon in the long run, or will the evil corporation end up having its due in the end? And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like on your way out and consider subscribing to stay up to date on all of our upcoming Severance content. And as always, keep those tinfoil hats on, folks, and I will see you on the next one.
Now. Goodbye, Marcus.
Wait!